to solve the mystery of his death. Before the day is gone, baby, before the play is done, honey, find the truth, find the truth. Then he lay down again on his back and put his arms and legs in the air and shook them vigorously before he let them drop with a thud. Don't shake like that, Huff said, you look like a bug. But turn your head to your side and make your eyes bug out, and put out your tongue a little more to the side, precisely. A lovely dance, my love, said the lady, such grace. How can it be tolerated, on the hill or under it? I dance in my head all the time, Huff said, when I'm trying to fall asleep, as a bit of flame or a tampon on the wind or a pony, and tonight it's as easy to do it as to dream it. Well, she said. They retreated to the bushes once again, to nibble each other's nipples for a while. His were brown and fat, but she praised them sincerely. Such beautiful buttons, my love, she said. Hers were so perfectly formed and such a lovely shade of rose he could hardly believe his eyes when she parted her dress. He brought out a pen light to better to see them with, and stuck it under her breast, looking to see if they were real. Do you wish for them to glow, she asked. And then they both did, with a light that was so warm he could feel it on his face. Forgive my doubting, lovely lady, he said. He put his face between them to make a joyful little speedboat sound. He had almost been arrested once for lurking in a laundromat to press his face into the piles of warm laundry, and now he knew what he had been seeking when he did that. The ideal experience of which that, pleasant as it was only a degraded iteration. Do pinch them, he said, muffledly, of his own nipples, raising his hands up on either side of her and snapping his fingers like a pair of castanets. He looked up to see her smiling down benevolently on him. Perfect, he said, because she was pinching just hard enough and no harder. And who can ever do that at first pinch? But even through the perfect pleasure, he heard strains of music and voices arguing. Duty calls us, he said, and bowed 3 times, once to the left breast, once to the right breast, and once to her face. Shall we have a part 2, he asked her. And 3 and 4, she said. We would have endless days and nights, my love, if this weren't the last night. But pleasure has a way of lengthening the hours. I've always found it shortens them, Huff said, and cold nights are longer than warm ones. He closed her dress and took her hand and led her from behind the bushes in a dance, so everyone would think they were merely rehearsing back there. Mary and Princess were arguing nearby. Feather step, feather step, feather step, Mary said. Do-si-do, said Princess, and did just that, circling Mary, but keeping her eyes on Huff the whole time. Right, boss? A small crowd, drooping streamers in their hands, surrounded them. Bob and Hogg, dressed respectively as a chair and a couch, were sitting on the ground quietly talking. You can't just make it up as you go along, said Mary. That's not choreography. You're just jealous of my moves, said Princess, and struck Mary with her hip. It was obvious that she meant it in a friendly way, but Mary pushed her. Huff sighed and thought of all the things he could say, that this dance was very important, that its intricate geometries were meant to hypnotize the mayor and make him more receptive to the subtle lessons that would come later in the play, that the delightful irony of furniture dancing with furniture would cause him to let down his guard, so the more serious ironies yet to come could strike home. He shook his head and drew in a breath to scold them with, but caught sight of his lady's face before he spoke, and had a different idea. He held out his hand to her, and she took it. Without speaking, they started to dance, and with their feet and their hips and their jiggly necks showed the quarreling girls and the lazy boys and the crowd of limp-ribboned extras exactly what he meant. They all fell into step, the furniture following him through the steps he had created, the high grass kick and the lawnmower and the jack-in-the-box and the yoga master taffy spin. It wasn't effortless, but it was so easy he started to cry. Why tears, my love? Asked his lady, spinning her hand round and round above her head so all the little people danced in a ring and waved their ribbons. For happiness, of course, he said, which wasn't exactly why, so he tried to dance it out instead. How wonderful and overwhelming it was to want something and then to get it. Happy or sad, she said, wiping his tears away. I cannot bear them. She drew him away from the crowd, now a self-sustaining choreography, and they went behind another bush. "What rank delight," she said, before she blew him. "Your mouth," he replied, "is like," but he could think of nothing to compare it to, and then it seemed rude or ungrateful even to try. The lesson of the dance, that words were not necessary or not enough, was still with him, so he answered her with a moan and a giggle and a deep gurgling sigh, and then went nosing under her skirts to give her a reciprocating thank you. But the way seemed very long from her ankle to her crotch. Her skirts were white and transparent, layer by layer. Initially, he could see her white leg aglow with a special mixture of moonlight and starlight and torchlight. But the world beneath them darkened as he nosed upward until he was navigating only by touch and by smell. Even the way up became notional. He wasn't entirely sure where his arms and hands had gone, and his head seemed to be floating sideways and down as much as up. Then there was a faint light in the dark and a soft wind blowing a scent against his face, something like rosemary and gourmet cat food. And then he had arrived. He gorged himself on her, eating with his lips and tongue, but also somehow just as much with his cheek and nose and eye, and pressing his eye to her as if to a keyhole, he thought he saw the source of the light, flashes of lightning deep within her. When they emerged again from the bushes, she was riding on his shoulders, having ascended there somewhat accidentally. Without her armored shirt, she was very light, and he pranced merrily to that portion of the field where Bob lay on a bier of sticks and stones, while the wonders of the lost world were projected, shadows on a white sheet held up by taller defectors, for his sad, dying benefit. There was a disagreement about how the images should be sequenced, and Mary was complaining that there was no color in them, and Princess was calling her a snob and a colorist. Black and white was good enough for everybody for hundreds of years, she said. Hundreds of years. "Is it time for me to sing?" Bob asked, staring at the screen with his head cocked to the side and an empty glass in his hand. "Garçon," said Huff, snapping his fingers at one of the little people walking about with a bottle on his head. He took the bottle and poured for Bob, and then took a swig himself, careful to balance his lady by holding more tightly to her leg with one hand. "It's time," he said to Bob, not bothering to hush Mary or Princess. "I don't know if I've had too much or not enough," Bob said, sniffing at the glass. "Drink up," said Huff, "it's good for your voice." When they tried the song earlier, it had not been plaintive or sad enough. Bob had sounded like James Cagney singing "You're a Grand Old Flag," and Huff had told him to take a break and a few more drinks and to reflect on sad things. Now he just looked confused, and Huff thought of pinching him again a few times to get him in the right frame of mind. The scene and the song was meant to convey Saul's great weariness. He felt constantly afflicted, Huff had explained, pinching. He just wants to get away from it all. "I get it," Bob had said, slapping away Huff's fingers, but now Huff realized he had forgotten something. With his lady on his shoulders, it was almost as if he could borrow a little of her being to think with, and now it was stunningly obvious that Saul was as nostalgic as he was despairing, and believed death would somehow bring him back to the good old days. He wanted to explain that, but Bob was already singing. "Take me home." I was warned about this. "Take me home, my friend. I want to go home, my friend. It's no good here anymore, my friend. All the good things have gone away, even strawberries and peaches and apricots, compassion and empathy and fellow feeling. Where did they go? Take me home, my friend, oh thin, sharp, pokey, needly friend. Take me home." Listening, Huff realized that he had understood the form but not the substance of Sal's nostalgia, and now here Bob was singing it back to him in explicit detail, while the shapes of sunflowers and peach trees and buffalo and tall stately giraffe stretched and leaped and pranced upon the sheet, first in stark black and white and then in shimmering color. They all started to sing along with Bob, even though it was supposed to be a solo number, and Huff swayed in time with the music, which came from everywhere and sounded very full, though the string section played on crickets' legs, and the horn section blew blades of grass between their thumbs, and the largest of the timpani was a paper cup. Huff swayed too far and unbalanced his lady, who fell to the right. She turned in midair and landed on her feet, but Huff fell on his side, transported by the images and the song. "Cover my eyes," he said, and she threw a veil over his neck and face, and led him away once more behind the circling bushes. Now they fucked in earnest, which seemed like the right thing to do. The glorious success of Bob's rehearsal seemed like permission somehow. He hadn't said, "Take 5, everybody," but he beamed it at them now, wishing they could all find as refreshing a pastime as he and his lady had. "No more tears, my love," she said as he blubbered on her, but he couldn't stop, not even at the thought of mistakenly impregnating her with his sadness, and not even at the thought of what fruit such a union might bear. A child constitutionally incapable of being happy, he thought, and part of him watched it as he sniffed and licked and thrust, as his cock hearted and bucked, as he rolled himself on her and off her and poked her now from the front and now from the back and now from the side. It wailed in its cradle and pouted in its high chair, and it frowned in Santa's lap, and everyone and everything disappointed it because it had been born sad to live sad. Tears were its nature and formed its lot, and though it never asked for any of the terrible things that befell it, it luxuriated in them just the same, mistaking cynicism for bravery and despair for reason. "I'm crying because it's all so beautiful," he said to it, but it didn't listen. It thought deafness was a virtue. "No more words, my love," his lady said, so Huff didn't speak to it anymore, but tried to show it by gestures what he meant, and it felt like he was discovering what he meant by and through this marvelous fucking. Like he had never, in all his days of being wise, sometimes pretending and sometimes not, actually understood anything about suffering or joy until this very moment, which encapsulated and recapitulated the named and nameless struggles of his whole life, the outcome of which he was both breathlessly creating and breathlessly waiting for, not actually knowing if it would be triumph or defeat, until he came, standing, with both hands thrown up high over his head, and his lady lifted to the stars on his impossibly stiff, impossibly eloquent cock. He came and came and came and fell backward as if through a mile of air or a lifetime to land on the soft grass with a noise like his name, feeling like he was saying his name properly for the first time in his life, because for the first time he knew who he was and what he was all about and what he really wanted, which was precisely this. He had nothing left, not will or energy or expertise with which to venture from the bush and offer to his friends and co-conspirators, though he heard them rehearsing the last song, ensemble and unsupervised. "People," they sang, "people who eat people are the loneliest people in the world." "Bravo," he called out, the words muffled by his lady's breast. "Bravo, everybody. Well done." Thanks a lot.